Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole, the 4th District again. This is another one of our weekly chats on what's happening in Congress. This has been actually a very busy and consequential week in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate. Big things are occurring. In the House, the week was dominated by appropriations bills. 10 bills of the 12 that fund the government came across the floor in two different packages. The bills pretty much passed on a party line vote. I don't think a single Republican voted for it. That's not unusual at this stage of the deal because, frankly, none of the compromises that happen when the Senate and the House sit down together have yet been reached. So party line votes, not unusual. Although in this case, I think Republican opposition was also intensified by, number one, the extraordinary level of spending in all of these bills, which are well above anything we've done last year, a 17% increase in domestic spending. So Republicans are upset about that. Second, and maybe even more importantly, the systematic stripping out of pro-life amendments, things like the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits the federal government from using federal taxpayer dollars to fund abortion on demand, or abortions except in very limited cases like rape, incest, or life of the mother. The Weldon Amendment, which provides conscience protection for doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals. It simply says you can't force them to participate in an abortion if they have a moral objection to that procedure. Every American ought to have the right to exercise their conscience on something as significant as human life. Third amendment would be the so-called Helms Amendment, which says the United States government will not fund abortion activity overseas through foreign aid or contributions to international organizations like the United Nations Population Fund. Again, I think a good amendment. So there were a whole variety of different amendments, and the Democrats just decided to strip them out. Now, these amendments have actually been in law for decades in many cases. The Hyde Amendment itself is 46 years old. It was first 45 years old, first passed in 1976. The Helms Amendment is even older. It was first passed in 1971, so literally 50 years ago. These things have been routine. Members of both parties have routinely voted for them because they represent a compromise between pro-life and pro-choice positions. But the Democrats have simply decided they're going to strip any pro-life protections out. And now this is not going to fly in the United States Senate. You have to get to 60 votes there. There's no way the Republicans in the Senate would allow this. So at some point, unless the language comes back in, then you'll see all the bills become what's called a continuing resolution, which preserves the pro-life protections, but says basically the spending levels of Donald Trump's last year will be the spending levels for next year, the second year of the Biden administration. So I think that's going to ultimately make cooler heads prevail, and we have a shot at a negotiated position. I was very involved in this debate because we dealt with it in Rules Committee. I offered an amendment that was supported by every single Republican to reinstate these pro-life positions. I was surprised, honestly, the amendment was not made in order. So we tried to add it in on the floor in a complicated maneuver, but at least it put everybody on record as to where you are. And again, I'm very proud every single Republican voted to restore pro-life protections. That includes, by the way, pro-choice Republicans. We certainly have some pro-choice members, but they still agree this is an issue of conscience and no American taxpayer should have their dollars forcibly used for a procedure that they find morally objectionable. So I think we made a strong statement this week, and I hope our friends on the Democratic side of the aisle understand that there will be no regular appropriations bills unless they restore this language. And we're going to continue that fight. In my view, we'll ultimately win it. But again, it would be better to have solved the issue now. The longer it goes on, the more rancorous the debate becomes. And in the end, the Republicans aren't going to move. And so if you want to pass appropriations bills that would be bipartisan and negotiated, you're going to have to restore language that, again, in many cases is decades old. So that occupied a lot of time this week. On the Senate side, which I usually don't comment on, but it's pretty interesting. There's potentially a breakthrough on a major bipartisan infrastructure deal, but none of us have seen the text of the bill. The Senate did make the decision to go into a debate, and they'll be in session next week when the House is not. So this story will probably go into there. But again, I think both of our senators voted not to extend the debate until they saw the bill. Doesn't mean, we don't know yet whether it's a good or bad thing for Oklahoma, but I think Senators Langford, Senator Inhofe were very wise to say we're not proceeding until we actually see the text of the bill and see whether or not it focuses exclusively on infrastructure, or it has things that are not appropriate for an infrastructure bill, and it doesn't overspend. All of us want to know how this thing really paid for. Because it's an expansion of what we would normally do, somewhere in the neighborhood of 550 to 600 billion dollars more. So that's something that we ought to focus on. Probably the thing that's caught the most interest this week has been the flap on Capitol Hill over masks. As you know, we had Center for Disease Control guidance, CDC as it's called, that if you got vaccinated, you didn't need to have a mask. We now have a more significant variant out, and Democrats basically have decided that you need to be masked even when you're meeting inside. So if you watch House proceedings or committees, you'll see people wearing masks again. Now, a lot of people are pretty upset about this. If you're vaccinated, why do you need a mask? And that has caused a lot of anger, and it's compounded by the fact that we have an attending physician that laid down those rules in the House, but he didn't do the same thing in the Senate. So one half of the United States Capitol is wearing masks, and the other half, the United States Senate, is not. And we have the same attending physician that looks after the health of Senate and Senate staff, and House staff. So we think they ought to be uniform. Now, the supposition is that Speaker Pelosi decided to impose a mask mandate on the House side to make a political point, or perhaps some of her members are genuinely concerned. I really can't tell you what the motives are, but it's ridiculous to have two sets of regulations in the same building. So until the science is made clear, I think this is going to be a point of friction. Personally, look, I'm quite content to follow whatever regulations there are, and I will. But again, you can't be upset when people say, why, when I'm vaccinated, and the CDC has told us in the past we don't need to wear masks if we're vaccinated. It's changing its guidance. We haven't seen the studies that back that up yet. They might be released by the time you see this video. I certainly hope so. But again, this idea that we're having bifurcated regulations in the United States Capitol is simply ridiculous, and it suggests that this is theatrical or personal or political, rather than being good sound science and good sound healthcare advice. So we'll stay tuned about that. But again, I would end with where I ended last week. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, please do. This new Delta variant that's out there is much more contagious. It doesn't seem to be any more deadly, but it is much more contagious than anything we've seen before. And you're seeing a real spike in people that have not been vaccinated getting the COVID virus. And that's unfortunate. It's dangerous, and we don't want to run that risk. So hopefully, again, those of you that have not had the opportunity to get vaccinated will avail yourself of that. There's plenty of vaccine available. It's not hard to get done, and I will tell you, having taken the vaccine myself at the earliest possible opportunity, I've seen no ill side effects by anybody. So important thing to deal with, but it's also important that we not go back to masks and shutdown unless it's absolutely essential. Our economy is just coming out of this. School is right around the corner. People need to be free to go on with their lives with the appropriate precautions. And the most important precaution is simply taking the vaccine. So again, I would hope those of you that haven't had the chance, avail yourself of that. And Washington will continue to have silly season in terms of mask in one half of the Capitol and no mask in the other until we actually get the political leadership on both sides in the same place. It's strange because the Democrats do run the entire building. Senator Schumer is the majority leader, the Democratic leader, and the majority leader of the United States Senate. Speaker Pelosi is the speaker and the leader of the Democrats in the House. Maybe they ought to sit down and talk together and get this thing straightened out. But the idea that it's somehow magically safe once you cross the rotunda into the Senate, then you don't need a mask. But if you cross it back the other way into the House, you need one. I think the most ridiculous part of this entire thing is the speaker's threat that if you don't have a mask, you're going to be arrested. That is ridiculous. If you've taken the vaccine, you're perfectly safe. Statistically, even with this new virus variant of the virus out there, the number of people that have gotten the vaccine that have been infected with COVID is minuscule. It's like 0.0001%. It's 5,000 out of 160 odd million Americans right now. So, again, I understand the virus can mutate and change, and we need to be very observant about that. And if we need new direction, then that's fine. But this over politicization of a public health care issue is regrettable, and it's very confusing to the public. So I would just say we need to sit down and work together on this and not let people get too worked up over it. With that, I won't be talking to you for a while. Probably be talking to you more about what's happening in the district in the next couple of weeks. Congress is going out, the House is going out, the Senate will stay in session working on coronavirus, I'm sure, but working more on the infrastructure bill and the efforts of a much larger infrastructure package where there'll be uniform Republican opposition. The House may be called back into session to deal with some part of that, but I don't expect these legislative issues to really resolve themselves until the fall. I will say this, the Speaker's threat, which he has repeated several times, including again this week, that I won't consider the bipartisan bill unless the partisan bill is also passed by the Senate, is just simply legislative blackmail of the first order. Look, if the Senate can get something done, the House should look at it and consider it. But it shouldn't say you have to pass another piece of legislation before you do. So with that, have a good August and talk to you soon.